are live. Well, welcome to another reintroduction podcast. I'm here with my fantastic co-hosts, Mina Merham and Mina Suiris, but I'm also here with two special guests that have blessed us today in order to have a really challenging conversation. I'm here with my good friend Brad Smith, and Brad is a Christian. He works for the military, and we've been buddies for a really long time. I was blessed to see Brad get baptized into the Orthodox faith, and I've known him for a number of years in small groups and deep and meaningful conversations. And he's always challenged me to know who God is from varied perspectives. So I'm really appreciative of him being on this podcast, and I'm excited for all you guys to get a glimpse of the brilliance of Brad Smith.
Wonderful, and I get to also introduce our brother Sam Beshara, who I've had the blessing of knowing for a couple of decades here, and I've had a chance to learn from over the years and to really get to have communion with in many, many ways. And Sam is an inspiring person because besides having 100 things going on, he has a passion for education and actually have their own school that's going on, the Vineyard Christian School. Big shout out, just a little plug. See free advertising. Please enroll today.
We need a sponsorship, Sam. We need a sponsorship.
Right.
I got you guys. You got it right next to the logo.
No, but among other things, Sam's been active in education in the church for decades. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to chat with him today. And we're just excited to be able to talk together.
Guys, who's going to introduce me? Who's going to introduce me, guys? Come on.
We got to introduce your mic, bro. Your mic is fresh over there.
Come on. Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'll take that. So why are we here today, guys? What are we talking about?
Mina Suiris is the most strapping gentleman in the Coptic Church. I just want to give you guys that introduction.
Thank you, Chris.
And Chris is the newest dad in the Coptic Church. We got to give that a shout out. Proud Papa.
Papa of two kids.
Twins, baby.
Buy one, get one free.
That's right. That's the new discount.
Yeah, you say that now, but it's no discount, bro.
Carrying those two babies was a beautiful sight. You've been working out for Chris.
So why are we here today, guys? To talk to me.
Well, man, I'm glad you asked. So, as anyone who maybe has a TV or lives in the world today understands that there's been some stuff that's been going on that's kind of really come to a head, right? With all this, discussion that's happened after the murder of George Floyd. So, as you guys know, people who are listening or have tuned in, our podcast has always been trying to figure out how to discuss issues that are relevant today and how they correlate with misunderstandings about God. So we really feel that there is, in this topic in particular, there's a huge misunderstanding that we want to unpack over this hour together about what we believe about race, God believes about race, what the church believes, and what is our role in all that. Okay, so we're going to unpack that a little bit together. And to just start things off, I just want to go around the room a little bit, excuse me, and just share a little bit your experience. What have things been like, with all this that's going on? What's been your response? What's been your experience from a general perspective?
Brad, let's start with you, man.
All right, I'm coming down from down south in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and it's a real interesting city. It's always been a city of contrast, and that's no different now. We have Black Lives Matter. I just left a march a few minutes ago, and about an hour ago, I guess. And we also have an active KKK chapter that's been demonstrating as well, and everyone in between. And so, it's a place where there's a lot of tension, and whether it's in the church, whether it's in the workplace. So yeah, that's it's been quite a few weeks for me.
I think for me it's been a rude awakening of some sort, because we've dealt with this issue time and time again. Things have come up in the past with isolated events of racism in America and in the world in general, and we've almost have grown desensitized to it. This time, it sounds like it's one of those situations coming up again, but with a different context. Is that what I'm noticing is that people are kind of like, instead of just waking up alone, they're kind of nudging each other. Be like, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And there's been a lot of conversations full of tension, which is actually a very good thing. And usually we tend to shy away from having these difficult conversations with people who have different views than we do. But I've noticed that now we are embracing it, and we're coming together to kind of discuss it together among these tensions, because the only way we can reach a conclusion is by actually taking the time to discuss it with the people who view it differently. So I'm happy to see that happening in our streets and on social media for us today. It's been great.
Yeah, for me, it's been really interesting. I checked into a hospital a week ago to deliver these babies, and I came out, and the whole world was flipped upside down. And bringing in two little babies into this world, into coronavirus, and into the murder of George Floyd, has been kind of a really introspective moment for me, because it's made me have to think about what is the world that my children are coming into, and how do I want them to be part of shaping the world. As many of you know, I named my son Micah, and Micah 6:8 is a powerful verse, is a verse about seeking justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So we named Micah. We had this name planned for a period of time, but it gives such relevance to the conversation today, because I do want my kids to be justice seekers. I do want my daughter to be the one who guides the blind to the grace of God. I do want, all of us fellow brothers and sisters to be part of the healing that this world needs so desperately in this time. So I'm shocked, because I walked out of the hospital and it's like, there's tanks all over Washington D.C. right now. It feels like we're in a police state at the moment. And many of you know, like, there were tear gas blown at peaceful protesters, and there's been just a lot of crazy things have happened. So it's a very powerful change of events that has happened in my life in the last week, going into a hospital and then coming out into a world that seems like is falling apart.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris. It's been I was telling you guys a little earlier, but personally, and this is a public apology to that I haven't been as moved for all the previous events, that like Eric Gardner and all the, obviously they had an impact on me, but and I was initially, it hurts, it stinks, and I feel bad, and I don't know what to do. And then a few weeks later, it moves on. And I genuinely feel that this time it's different. And I know I've said that for all the previous, murders that have happened, but I genuinely feel this time is different. And maybe God is using it, with the coronavirus thing and everybody's kind of home, to really focus on it. If everybody was working as normal, would this happen in all 50 states or across the world, that people would be protesting? Who knows? But I think it's, at least for me, really eye-opening, especially when I saw the video. I saw clips of it initially, and then I was like, okay, I get it. But, it may be a little touchy, but I encourage people to watch the whole thing. And I know it may hurt. It may, I don't have the stomach for it, or I'm, in my, like, bougie apartment. I don't really need to, like, watch this or whatever. But to really watch the whole thing will give you a glimpse of what people like this go through on a daily basis. So we can, like, I don't want to say suck it up for 9 minutes and watch it, but to really, I feel that me watching the full thing gave me a much deeper zeal to actually want to do something different this time as opposed to before. So I'm here learning from you guys to see how we can talk about it. I know the first step is obviously talking about it. Silence is violence, and everybody's been saying, but in going the next steps, I'm eager to hear from you guys and see what we can really do different this time.
Yeah, I love that, Sam, because part of I think what really struck me in this whole situation is that we don't really get it. Like, when you're saying, to watch the video, whatever it's got to be, whether watch a video, watch a documentary, watch something, but the reality is, like, this is difficult for us to fully grasp, fully understand. So we have to begin from a position of humility, of us kind of learning, of us kind of getting the story straight, getting the context right, because we don't fully appreciate it. And in particular, one part, and Brad kind of helped me think about this, as we were preparing for this conversation, is how faith has been in the past, couple of hundred years, has been used as a powerful inspiration for change. You know, if you're Martin Luther King Jr., if you're Harriet Tubman, who, you know, they were calling Moses at a point because of what she was doing, or as a tool for oppression. And it's really impressive. It's really, I mean, it's remarkable how the same book, the same set of words, right? And now it's the same way. It can be lifted up as a symbol to control people or as a symbol for liberation. So that's been the most wild thing for me. And one of the things we want to unpack here is, do you guys think from your experience that the Bible and the Christian teaching has been manipulated or misused or misunderstood before to justify that kind of behavior, whether you're looking at the Old Testament or the early church or more recent? What's been your experience on the manipulation or the misuse of Christian teaching?
I think if you look at the history of slavery in general, it's so easy to see how even Christians have manipulated, even though like slavery is across the board, is across the globe, across religions. But it's interesting to see in America, since this is the context we're talking about, to see how even slave owners justified the slavery movement using the Gospels and using the Bible. And you say, you know what, just focus on Jesus as Lord, and everything like is status quo. This is what we do, and this is how we're going to keep on doing it. And they kept going day in, day out, without it even like affecting the conscience. Like it didn't bother them. They slept at night normally as if there was nothing. So I think it's very powerful to see how the Bible, like you said, has been used to empower slavery, empower racism in a way, because now you can see that most Christians at this point will never say that they still support slavery, but it's hard to find the dialogue when it comes to racism is still a little bit different. Not everyone is so gung-ho about the implication of racism and completely cutting it from its roots as people are about slavery. So why is that the case?
I think, Mina, you made me think about it a little more on how people can use the same thing for two different ways, and it can be, you know, on a bigger scope outside of racism. Like even look at the whole coronavirus thing with when it initially happened and people said we're closing churches and communion, and there was this like big group of Christians that were like, if you don't, you know, then you don't have any faith if you think you can't get sick or go in church and all this stuff. And then the other side, so they're, like you're saying, using it as a tool to manipulate or to oppress. And it's scary because it works on people. It works on people that are not, you know, that are still looking for answers, that don't know what to do. And the people that are people of authority that are kind of saying these things or using things know that. And so they're manipulating it either for them or to be against other people. But it's kind of scary. So it's kind of a wake-up call to try to find our own answers in our own relationship with God, as opposed to kind of being manipulated and pushed in certain ways.
I think to both of what you said, like that you both had really good points, and mirror home to the historic part of it. Like there's a lot of people that for the whole struggle of Black people in America, there's always this expression like to forget the past. That was just slavery. That was just civil rights. That was and in 50 years, I imagine we'll be saying that was just back then in the 2020s. And so there's a definite need to move on from the past, to not dwell on it. But it is impossible to look at a lot of these issues without looking at the past, because the scary thing about this and the sick thing about it is a lot of the people that are working these systems or going to these churches, they don't go do this maliciously. They're not saying, how can I hurt a Black person today? They're just operating a machine that was built 100, 200, 300 years ago, that they're not questioning how it was built. And, you know, I am 5 miles from a church that preaches that Black people cannot receive full salvation because they were two schools of thought. One is they were cursed, they received the curse of Ham and were turned Black for their sins. And two, that we are the descendants of Cain. And so are not fully human, not fully. And this is, I mean, it sounds crazy. It sounds like something from a movie, but this is something that churches are still teaching. And and beyond theology, there's just so many systems in America that we don't question anymore, but they're not worked by evil people that are actively thinking of how can I hurt Black people. Some of them are, but some of them are just theologies that are like Christian music is something that, in the 60s, 70s, it was determined what was considered Christian music, and all of the white music was Christian, all the Black music was gospel or something else. And that marketing decision was the church clearly defined what it considered. Like, if you clap your hands and say hallelujah, that's not Christian music. That's something else. But we'll tell you what Christian music is. So when we listen to Hillsong is not an evil racist band, but they are operating in a structure that rewards, adherence to, whatever the dominant Christian society is.
Wow. Dude, I had no idea about that. That's kind of mind-blowing. I'm not going to lie. And I think that actually is a really powerful statement, Brad, because I don't think we think about the systems that are in place, whether it be in, Christian worship structures or whether it be in sociological structures. Like, I had no idea about the systemic racism that has been going on in our country until I watched 13th. Mm-hmm. I didn't know the 13th Amendment even gave a loophole to continue slavery. And for those of our listeners who have never heard of this, and the 13th Amendment of the United States basically says slavery is abolished unless you are incarcerated. So when the Southern economy was built up on slavery, what happened was they needed people to do work. So they started to incarcerate mass quantities of African American men, of Black men, to basically continue to do this work, but under the guise of being in prison. So people don't realize, but the number one predictor of juvenile delinquency is single-parent households, right? So we don't realize about the breakdown of the family. We don't realize about how much stripping fathers from their households. We don't realize about how much that has an implication on the current events of today. So, mind-blowing about what you said, Brad, and I encourage our listeners also to be thinking about what led to the conditions of today. What's the history behind where we are today? And how did we get to this point where people are in the streets rioting, to make their voices be heard?
So let's take this and kind of make it, like, tie it into the theme of exactly what we started this podcast about, is how does God, since like Brad brought up a crucial point about like the teachings that are happening still in some of the churches in America. So how does God really feel about racism? What do we know about God's view of racism? Someone tell me something.
That's not what's going on now, hopefully.
I heard a really nice thing from Father Thomas Hopko, and he was talking about how when Christ was saying, he didn't like the phrase that people were doing good things to people because of the Christ that's in them. I see Christ in them. And when I initially heard it, I'm like, what do you mean? That's what I've heard like my whole life. Do good because Christ is in that person, or smile because you see Christ in that person. And he was like, no, Christ didn't say love that person because I'm in there. He said, love that person because I associate with that person. So for me, that was kind of a big wake up call in the historical teaching, like you were talking about it, where before I can picture myself like giving something to a homeless person and like putting their smell away or this or that to focus on, Christ is in them. That's who I'm. But no, I need to love that person, that skin color, that disability, whatever it may be. That's what I need to love, which will end up in me loving Christ. It's not that I am like taking all this, this whole mask off of everything and looking at the core. No, it's to Christ identified with that person. Whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you have done unto me. And that, I think, has been at least a personal wake up for me to know that, like, to really focus on the person and not of something that they believe in or associate with or whatever, but really focus on this specific person.
Yeah, and that sort of ties into something I've been thinking about as well, is in terms of, like, where do we learn in the Orthodox Church about equality and equity, like something that you can learn as a baby or as an elderly person, is how the Eucharist is actually our ultimate like teaching point for this, right? The ultimate portion of the ultimate like understanding of equality is how at that Eucharistic table, we are all equal. Doesn't matter how much money you have or how much you don't, what color your skin is, any other thing that exists in your life. That's the ultimate equalizer for us in the Orthodox Church. And thank God there's nobody ever nobody checked my ID before I was, you know what I mean, or like what I've done in the past or other things about whatever. And I remember hearing this in a patristics class that we took, and how it really breaks down our theology. Because for us in the Orthodox Church, and I know this was something that we talked about earlier too, this radical equality, this idea that we are in God's eyes, in the eyes of Christ, all like sanctified to be able to partake of the Eucharist, is the ultimate thing that lifts us all up. I mean, beyond even just thinking that we deserve equal rights, or that we deserve to be treated fairly, or that we deserve not to be murdered for no reason, that we deserve communion with the living God, all of us, every single one. To me, really elevates the state of mankind, really.
Yeah, for me, hearing that question as an American, and as an American, separate from my identity as an African American, so from both identities, the answer is 100% yes. And I think when we ask this question, we have to ask what our brothers and sisters around us think. Not we want to know God's will for ourselves and our lives, but we also want to know, what are they thinking? And America has always wrestled with this, and just the Black church, it survives on the belief that God cares about racism and God cares about them. And it has survived since the days of slavery, since we were given a new religion by our slave masters, by the people that were beating us. Our hope has been that we were those Israelites, that God cares about us just like he cares about the Israelites. And that is our continued hope. And not just that God cares about us, but that people around us that we often feel despised by, or looked down upon or whatever, we want them to care about them with the same eyes that God has for us. And in the contrast of that, there has always been an element in America, like the Civil War is framed as an issue of economic states' rights, but and again, I don't want to dwell on the past, but I say this because there's Confederate flags all around my house. Like, there's a giant Confederate flag every day I get off the exit to go to work. And that's, maybe another conversation, but that is a symbol for something that has not been forgotten. Still is very much alive for many people, either explicitly in their hearts or just from the structures that are around us. And these people wrote a new constitution. Not everyone knows this, but they changed the constitution. It's almost exactly the same, but they added God. Our constitution does not explicitly say God. Like, we have Almighty, we talk about kind of God in the abstract, but they added God and they added slavery. And so they united these things. And when people talk about white supremacy, when they criticize that term, when they say, that's a social justice warrior term, no, this was a term that the Confederacy, that those people coined themselves. They coined it and said, God has made the white race supreme over all other races. And that gives us the right to kill Indians, Native Americans, to rape, and kill Black people. And so it is very much that theology. No one would say that today, or I won't say no one, because there's churches down the road from me that would say it, but the majority, those are considered fringe, even by most people in common society. Those are considered fringe ideas, but the biases and the foundation that we're built on still very much has a lot of those, that Black people are inferior, and that's not a social belief, that is a religious belief for many people.
Could I just ask a follow-up question on that, Brad, real quick? Has it ever been your experience that's, as a Christian man, someone has come and say, well, dude, how can you believe, how can you be a Christian knowing all this, knowing the historical context of how this was used, to oppress people? How can you possibly still buy this stuff?
So I'm thankful for myself that the faith was preserved, but I have many times asked myself, how did Christianity survive the first whip, the first family separation for everyone that says Black people have broken families, they don't know how to have families? Like, you got to understand that, like, we were bred like cattle. You have a strong Black guy, a fast Black guy, a meek Black guy, and a meek Black woman. You breed them together. It doesn't matter if father's in Georgia, mother's in South Carolina. So at the abolition of slavery, you had people that didn't know if they were, marrying their half sisters. Like, the idea of family was completely broken down. And it's a wonder to me that God was, it's a miracle. It's miraculous that gospel music, the music that wasn't allowed in the canon of Christian music, was built off of slave songs. These were songs that they would sing in their fields to encourage each other, to say, one day we're going to be free. One day God is going to show us a better life, a better salvation. And I really, like, the Ku Klux Klan is a Christian organization, or a nominally Christian organization. They pride themselves on holding the true faith. And one of their method of terror was lighting a cross on fire in their neighbor's lawn. And if you think that's history, like my neighbor is an Army veteran, and she had a cross burnt in her yard, and her white Christian neighbor asked her to please get the ashes off of his lawn. He didn't say anything. He didn't say, I like the Klan. He didn't say whatever. He said, please, like, that's scaring my children. That's ruining my lawn. Can you get the ashes off of my lawn? This is an Army veteran, and so I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, like, I'm thankful. I really am thankful that the faith has been preserved, that my grandmother, with all of her heart, has been able to separate all the ugliness that has been associated with Christianity. That so many Black mothers, fathers have kept the faith, that have been able to separate that, because it's, that's a miracle. That for me, that is greater than the Red Sea's parting. That Christianity has survived. That we still have hope in a God that was was manifested in crosses burning in our yards, and our churches being bombed and set on fire.
Brad, can I ask you a question about that? How do you think it was preserved? Like, what do you think? How do people separate God of, like, the trueness of who God is? Because I think this carries a lot of weight for all of us. Like, when we have misconceptions about God versus the reality of our experiences and the reality of who he is, right? So how do you think the faith was preserved in terms of them keeping a relationship with God, and this idea of this God who is a God of freedom, who is a God that's against slavery, who is a God that wants to set the captives free? Like, how do you think that happened?
So someone made the comment that this COVID has forced us all to, by virtue of being quarantined, we have been forced to pause, and the conditions, the external conditions have forced us to reflect on many things, our marriages, our relationships, our society, more than we ever have, maybe. And the same could be true of that. I think Black people were excluded from society. They were quarantined in their communities. They weren't allowed to go to this courthouse to gather politically. They weren't allowed to go to the parks to, whatever. The church was that was their place of politics, their place of prayer, their place to be fed, their social services center. That was the only place that, fortunately, that, like, only a few people were bold enough to attack churches. That was the only place that you could have sanctuary. Like, if you met in a Black barn house, that could, get burned. Not to say Black churches weren't attacked, but that was at least people had some reverence, some pause before that it was a safe haven. It's a, I think God has represented, and I wish maybe there's literature on this, but it just fascinates me. How did they just not jump to the next thing? Like, how did they just not renounce all their vows as soon as they were set free and look for another, nicer religion? But this is the other part of it. Like, slavery wasn't, or Christianity wasn't completely corrupted by Americans. Like, some of the leading abolitionists, some of the leading civil rights movements have always been born from Christians. The Quakers, the Mennonites, the Amish are out here protest. The Amish, like, how do they don't have TV? How do they know about this? Like, they're out there in their horse and buggies and whatever. Like, they're,
I told them that I went maybe.
Merham's out here proselytizing.
You would be, Merham. You would be the person to go.
Hey,
tell
man,
them.
you got to get everybody on your side for the cause,
But it's these Christian groups that have had the least investment in society. That they're not saying, but what about the economy? We can't if we get rid of slavery, what about the economy? Like, if we get rid of the prison industrial complex, then I'm gonna have to pay more for my shirts, like, because this shirt could have been made in prison. I don't like there's shirts, like, all things all around us, like are made by prisoners, and that is very much, and that can, if you only have to pay a prisoner, 20 cents an hour to, make stuff, it's an economic argument. And these Christian groups that were divorced from that, they led the way, and other groups, have historically stood with us. But we've seen both sides of it. We have seen redemption and abolition manifested in the faces of white Christians, in the faces of Christians of all colors, and we've seen the worst of it too. And thank God that we have been able to discern the what I believe is the true nature of. I pray that I don't have the curse of Ham, because I'm out of luck. Why am I even trying if I.
No curse of ham, no curse of bacon, man. You good?
It is.
Yeah.
It is so crucial to me when we see cultures or races or different ethnicities who are constantly being having the Bible and the gospel shoved down their throats in a way that is antagonizing and saying that you don't belong because of this, and making bigger context out of it. One is like African Americans or blacks in general in America saying, okay, you're second class, or you don't belong, or you're not going to attain salvation. Another big one, and sometimes this comes up, is that reading the Bible as a Palestinian Christian, where you're basically always being told that this land does not belong to you and it belongs to someone else. There's always like a lot of conflict that arises between you internally, and you start doubting yourself, and you start doubting the book you're reading. So I might just get up and leave. But there have been the truths that are defined, and there are mainly two cornerstones in the Bible that we can discuss and say God is not racist because of this. When God says that he has created all men in his own image, then there's no debate around the idea of who is second class and who's first class. That like racism violates this fundamental truth, is that we are all created according to God's image. The second one is that when Jesus was asked about the commandment, what is the greatest commandment? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. And he says later on, love your neighbor as yourself. But in the beginning, in between them, he links them. And this is one of my favorite parts in the whole Bible. He says, and the second is just like it. He equates loving your neighbor to loving God. And then if you're unable, there is no way, this is the second fundamental truth that is broken by racism, is that if you are not able to love your neighbor, and here the Bible does not on purpose deliberately outline who your neighbor is, because it includes everybody. And when you break that, there's no way you can say you are not going to love your neighbor and still love God. It does not work. There's no way. When he sends the disciples to preach, he says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, of all people. And we constantly say this. So there is no doubt on where God stands on this issue. There is issue, however, on where we stand. And sometimes we say, okay, is the church in general, like, or people in today in the churches, congregations, are they complicit? Are they we don't bring this up enough. And I think that's something we are all guilty of. Unless you're a black church in America today, you're probably not talking about racism. You're probably not talking about mass incarcerations. You're probably not talking about refugee issues. And why is that? Why is that the case? So is it that God doesn't care? Absolutely not. So how has the early church, or how has Orthodoxy dealt with this issue in the beginning? And I think that's important to kind of outline, where did we start as a church on issues of racism and differences and things like that, and how did we get here?
I wanna just say one thought about that, about Orthodoxy. One of the things that our church teaches us is the kiss of peace, right? And the kiss of peace is a really powerful thing that basically teaches every single one of us that regardless, like Mina was talking about, the Eucharist unites us and brings us on the same level field of eating the Eucharistic table. But the kiss of peace, historically, in the streets, somebody would greet somebody with a kiss, right? And when you'd greet somebody with a kiss, you were only able to greet somebody who had the same socioeconomics, the same class system, the same, like, a Roman guard would only greet a Roman guard with a kiss. In the church, everybody greeted one another with a kiss, right? And it didn't matter whether you were of higher socioeconomics or lower socioeconomics. And that's something for us today in the modern church, when we are greeting one another, to say, man, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter what level of money or poverty you live in, you are the same in Christ. So if we want to talk about God and his perspective and how he's taught us in the church, how he views racism, it's embedded throughout our whole liturgical service, whether it be in the Eucharist or whether it be in the greeting of how we greet one another, you know, holding each other's hands and then kissing. That's the sharing of breath, the pneuma. The kissing of hands is not just like, oh, this is a cute thing that we kiss each other's hands. We're sharing and exchanging the same spirit with one another. So it's just hearing Brad, you got me so fired up, man, about this, because it's so necessary for all of us who are all the people who are listening to this podcast, that God is so anti-racism, it's ridiculous. So if anyone uses faith as a means of pushing racism and saying that there is a supremacy among white people and there's a curse of Ham on black people, you're in La La Land. You're crazy. There is in the Orthodox Church, the church that's pre-denominational, there is embedded in our just greeting of one another that we are all the same. So wake up and smell the coffee, do your research, get away from your craziness. For the Fredericksburg Church, you need to go research Orthodoxy, because we have the truth embedded in our church. So that's my rant for a
Chris
second.
hasn't slept in a week already. Just he's gone old man.
I've been locked up in a hospital, you know, trying to... I'm fired up about this, guys. I'm fired up about this.
No, but you're right, though. I'm fired up, too. And it reminds me of maybe one of the first fights that you see kind of in Scripture that's just like recorded of St. Paul saying that he withstood St. Peter to his face, a.k.a. like got in his face and said, let's do this, was about this issue essentially of race. Of like, oh, here are these new Christians. There were new Christians who were the legit ones, you know, who used to be Jews first. Or there were the new Christians who just came out of nowhere. Oh, they were from this country or that country, whatever like inferior race, you know, they were. And then St. Peter initially was like, oh, okay, let's hang with the legit Christians, because, you know, these new guys are like, you know, they can have their own little table. They can play in the sandbox. And St. Paul told him, you're playing the hypocrite. You're playing the hypocrite, because in Christ there's no male, no female, no Jew, no Gentile, no this, no that. In Christ there's perfect unity and perfect equality. And that's, I agree with what you're saying, Chris, that it has to be so crystal clear that, of course, throughout history it's been manipulated and twisted and whatever, but there is no qualms, there is no question that the Scripture and the church tradition is as blatant and flashing lights as it can be. But here's the but, and maybe you guys can share on this too, is that sometimes judges us now. Because if we have the theology that is clear, and if we have the teaching that is clear, how come sometimes there's a little bit of a gap between that clear theology and our praxis, right? The orthopraxy, as we call it, or the way we live this experience. If we're so outraged and so fired up, and like St. Paul would fight about it, and it's in the liturgy and all this stuff, how come sometimes we're not so fired up about it? How come there's a little bit of a gap?
So I have a question for you guys. You know how, at least from what I've seen on social media, I'm assuming you guys have seen the same thing. There's a big group that are saying we should say Black Lives Matter. And then the other group is saying all lives matter. And that to me is kind of like what you're saying, that I think the church believes in both. And just follow my thought here. How you guys are saying, you know, there's no Jew nor Greek, and in church, there's no socioeconomic boundary. You know, we're all made in God's image. So, but then you see I've seen a lot of my friends of color saying like, no, you shouldn't say, I don't see color. You should see people's color and respect it and whatever. And so the one aspect that we're all equal is what God is specifically saying, and how you're saying we're all created in his image and everything like that. The other aspect of Black Lives Matter, or this person matters, is very clear to me in the parable of the lost sheep, where no, the one does matter. Obviously, you know, you can say, oh, I lost all my sheep, but no, the one mattered. It was lost. I got it. And now I'm rejoicing because of that one. So what do you guys take on that? I know it's been like a sensitive topic. Should you say it, Black Lives Matter or all lives matter? But I feel like it's understood to be both. And it may be difficult to kind of process. Yes, we're equal, but I know like you guys are big on like unity and diversity, and like focusing on being different but being the same. It's a hard concept, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I want to just chime in on that one, because you sparked a thing with me about unity and diversity. So
You're big on
I
that.
know you're getting me. So unity and diversity, right? This is modeled in the Trinity, right? God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They are equal, but not the same, right? The Father is not the Son is not the Holy Spirit. And if we're created in His image and likeness, we are all equal, but not the same. Meaning, Brad is different than I am. I'm different than Sam. Sam is different than Mina. We all share the same fabric, the same essence, the same, personhood through what God has embedded in us. But our difference is to be respected and to be honored, right? To to look at somebody who is not like me and to say, I respect you and I honor you, and I'm not going to diminish that yes, all lives do matter, but Black lives matter in this moment because we are living as if they don't matter. We are living as if they are a subhuman, people group that don't deserve the same fundamental human rights that we all deserve, right? It's a crazy conversation to even be articulating because it doesn't even make sense for me to say. If we are all created in the image and likeness of God, we all should share the same fundamental human rights. But how is it possible that we still keep living as if that's not a reality? How can we be living in America, the country that says that God bless America? God can't bless America if we can't be respecting that Black lives matter. He can't bless America. He can't bless us because we're so darn racist.
Hot soundbite right there, Chris. We're going to use that to promote the next episode.
Fired up.
Chris is going to make it so hard to edit this podcast later on because his voice is going to be up the walls.
Hey, Chris, calm down, man. You just got
Sorry, guys.
kids, bro.
My blood pressure, guys. I'm fired up, man. I'm fired up.
We get you.
Brad, I'm curious to hear your perspective, though, on this question.
Yeah. It reminds me of this time at the height of the revolution in Egypt, where I went into a Coptic church while they were praying for their brothers and sisters in Egypt. And I said, well, guys, what about the Assyrian Christians? What about the Palestinian Christians? And what about the Iraqi Christians? And of course, I never did that because that's crazy. Why would I do that while people are mourning their brothers? But, I'm making kind of a joke, but it's, I get it. I get why people are killed by police. I get Asian people are killed by the police. I get Black people kill each other. I get Black police officers are more likely to kill Black people than they are to kill people of other races. But I'll say that that's a loaded topic for sure. And there's a lot I could say on it, but I will say when you uplift people at the bottom, when the people at the bottom matter, when the poor, when the marginalized, when the despised people are uplifted, it uplifts everyone. And when you do that, all the tools that, the worst tools in society that were built on the backs of marginalized people have been then expanded to be used on other races. So I guarantee you, if there's police accountability for killing Black people, then white fatalities by police officers is going to go down too. But I can't guarantee you the other way. I can't guarantee you it's just from a pragmatic, practical standpoint, uplifting the least of these. I think there's a reason why we are instructed to look for and uplift the least of these, because it edifies us all. It makes us all safer. It makes us all closer to God. It humbles us. And yeah, so of course I believe all lives matter. This is an insane, why, everyone believes that, black people are not trying to diminish the lives of other people. But yeah, I think it's a holy, and I'm biased, but I'll tell you, I have been very hesitant to especially publicly to embrace my own struggles. I have very publicly advocated for cops, for Kurds, for people in Hong Kong, all over the world. That's easy for me. It's easy for me to say that because I don't feel like I'm doing it for selfish gain or for whatever. I don't know why, all the reasons why I did it, but I get it. And I'm only speaking for myself, but I realize that I'm denying my own pain. I'm denying my brother's pain, my family's pain, my community's pain by not explicitly saying that this in America, in this moment, especially that this matters and is worth saying. And I'll say also that Black Lives Matter is, again, a correction of things that we have never denied. We do not teach that the Confederacy, that the, you know, KKK, we don't frame those as Christian organizations that say Black people don't matter. So it's like, until there is some sort of, like a modicum of repentance for this, acknowledgement that this is reality, instead of like gaslighting us into thinking that this wasn't a reality, it is very hard for us to say it. It's not, we're not saying it to put down other races. We're saying it because we're still correcting people that don't believe that.
And you shouldn't be the one that has to speak on your behalf. We should be allies on your behalf. Just like you are an ally for us as Copts, speaking out for our causes, we should be the ones to speak out on the cause of Black Lives Matter, because those who are in a position of privilege should be the ones who are speaking out to those who are being marginalized. That is our responsibility. So you, as Brad, when you speak about Copts who are being marginalized, you're in a position of privilege because your faith isn't being discriminated against in that moment, right? And for me, I'm in a position of privilege because I'm not Black. So I have a responsibility to speak out on your behalf, to let the world know that there is something wrong that's happening. So sorry to chime in. I keep chiming in, guys, but that's just something
I have
that...
a question on what you just said.
Yeah.
I think like the goal is to, like what you guys are saying, to speak out on this topic. So maybe going back to what you were just saying, am I doing it? Are we encouraging people to realize that they have a privilege and they should speak on behalf of the underprivileged? Or should I say, no, I'm speaking on behalf of George Floyd because he is my brother, and I need to make sure that I am not dissociating myself from him as if he is my brother and speaking on his behalf, versus like, let me talk on the, what is easier to ask of people?
And I know, Chris, you're going to, because he sort of asked you, but I'm going to just hijack it. I think there's a particular place we have to speak from. Is not just privilege or not, or socio, whatever. For us, it's the context of like, no, as Orthodox Christians, my particular conviction is that this person is in the image of God. And that's why, you would see a picture of, an Orthodox bishop marching, is because this is part of my faith. Like my faith, the same way I can pray or take communion or whatever, like when the gospel, when St. John tells us that if you don't love your brother who you can see, you don't love God. Like this is me loving God. If I don't do this, then I don't love God. That's what the gospel tells us, right? So the impetus or the motive or the reason I do this, or the reason I teach Sunday school kids, like, hey, this is not just an activity that would be cute. This is not like a hashtag for your Twitter feed. No. This is your faith. Are you going to pray? You should pray. You should pray and you should act to bring justice and equity, because that is what we believe in. This is the very practice of what it means to be a Christian.
Absolutely. And I think to basically build on that, the idea that as Christians, when we take in our faith, especially you find this in minority Christian churches, without the label, whatever country you find it from, minority Christians, when they come from their churches and they come to America, land of freedom, they tend to struggle with this, is because they have been plagued with pain themselves, and they tend to focus on their own pain and reflect on that and say, you know what? No one is talking about my pain. Their pain is not greater than my pain. Why aren't you talking about my pain? And I think that is the conversation that we're seeing in our community about the All Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter. Is that people are saying, what about us? What about our pain? And the fundamental, and if you were to not to basically downplay this at all, but to say that someone is being bullied every day is equal to someone who's not is bullied every other day, or someone who had their lunchbox stolen against someone who is being bullied every day. There's a difference. Not to minimize the pain. Our pain is great, and we suffered. I mean, the Coptic Church has the highest numbers of persecution across all Christian martyrdom in general. But to be able to say, you know what, today Christ invites us to be able to transcend. The true Christian teaching says you have to be able to transcend your own pain to be able to speak for the pain of your brother, because that is fundamentally and in essence what Christ did on the cross when he came. He took on pain and he took on sacrifice. And we are invited to do the same thing ourselves in our community. Not to say that we don't have struggles, and not to say we don't have pain, but go back to Brad's point, when you uplift the most affected, whether it's you or someone else, just uplift to one group as brothers, like Sam is saying, not just because you are, privileged and you're kind of handing it down because it's your duty. No, it's because you've been created as brothers. It is your fundamental responsibility to uplift the most broken and the one who's most affected. So as a Christian minority, I encourage all our brothers and sisters to say, you know what, get up and say, I have pain. My people are persecuted. My people are killed. And because of that, I stand with Black Lives Matter and I stand with Black people. Almost everyone who's disagreeing with it and saying all lives matter is actually saying the opposite. They're actually saying what we're saying, but they're just not articulating it the right way, because we are acknowledging your pain. We understand that you are in pain, minorities in general, but understand that when you uplift this specific issue that plagues the entire nation and the entire world, you're also uplifting your cause.
I think the funny thing about that, Mina, like you said, when people see a different group persecuted, they start talking about, oh, but I was in my own thing. Like before, you didn't talk about it 6 months for the past 6 months. How come now, when this is brought up, you want to like kind of suppress that and talk about this? Yeah. Like, okay, talk about it on your, but this is the issue at hand. Yes, Coptic people are persecuted. Yes, other things are happening, but this is what's happening right now, and this is what we should talk about and try to. Obviously, people that may just not want to help or kind of make an excuse for them, do exactly what you said, Mina. Let me just go back. No, I was persecuted too. I know what you feel like. It's we don't like it's.
I don't want to invalidate it though. Like it's you can't like comparing pain. Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor, has an amazing quote where he says that pain is like a gas, and it fills the space that it's in uniformly. So whether you have a little bit or a lot, it feels like it is overwhelming you, and that shouldn't. I don't want to. It is not helpful. I don't think to diminish pain. I think it's helpful to connect, like you said, like you're all saying, to connect that pain and see how our pain is overlaps because it is. Like, I think one of your greatest challenges with any immigrant community, Hispanic, even other Africans, even Ethiopians, Nigerians, Caribbean Blacks, like this is our challenge, is to communicate how our pain is valid, and also that their pain, that we recognize their pain, but it's
because we are not like, just if the person that's trying to talk about their own pain, I feel like I want to tell them, if you talk about the other person's pain, it doesn't invalidate yours. Like you can both
can be true. Like those things can still happen.
And that's honestly, I think the most polarizing thing in this, Mina. Both can be true. Like, and that, like, both can be addressed to so many issues. You can like not like people, breaking small businesses or looting, and be for like Black Lives, or like you can believe in both. Like a lot of things are not as mutually exclusive as we think. You don't have to like, no, if I'm a Christian, I have to vote Republican all the time. I have to do this. Like you can do other things. It's okay. And God created us that way. And the Bible is so, like, you see the Holy Spirit move in the church, in the synod, like throughout all Christian like history, that everything's not so black and white. Things have evolved. There's new decrees because the Spirit of God is alive, and it changes, and it not changes, but like it deals with everything that's at hand. And that's kind of, it's the same, like again, we were saying before, it's the same, but it's different. We have to like.
Yeah. And I love the way this conversation has kind of happened, because I think it's sort of maybe scratch the surface of this conversation of racism and how God views racism. But I think for all of our purposes, of terms of like how we can encourage our listeners, like we need to be like, as an immigrant community, for those who are Copts that are listening, who are Egyptians who have immigrated from a hostile environment of Egypt because they're unable to practice their faith openly and freely, we have a responsibility, again, like we've all been saying, not to diminish our own pain for the sake of feeling another person's pain, but to think about our own pain and to be with our brother in their pain as well. So I think that's an important thing that we need to be challenging our listeners. But at the same time, in terms of our modern context of being in America, we have a responsibility to speak out. We speak up for those who have no one to speak for them, for the rights of those who are oppressed. That's Proverbs 31, right? We speak up for those. We have a responsibility to speak up for people who are oppressed. Jesus is like, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, right? Like he said to free, set the captives free, to like, help the oppressed, to like, this is the mission of Christ. So if it's the mission of Christ and we're supposed to be mini Christians, it should be our mission, and it is our mission. So where orthodoxy and orthopraxy don't meet, we have to be thinking about what we need to do to bridge it together. Where is our orthodoxy, our faith, and where is our orthopraxy, and where is the lack? Where are things falling apart? So what do you guys think about that in terms of just like final thoughts to, because this has been probably an hour conversation at this point, so we don't want our listeners to fall asleep.
Feels like 5 minutes, dude.
Maybe we need part 2, man.
Yeah, maybe we could do part 2. What do you guys think about closing thoughts for our listeners in terms of things that we can be doing in this moment? Brad, maybe you can lead us in this conversation in terms of what we can be doing in this time period to be with our brothers and sisters in the fight to end racism and to support them through this cause.
So we were kind of talking about this a little before, and I'll tell you, one of my favorite parts of Orthodox theology is how the process of deification occurs, and how when we make amends, when we seek justice, we're not just repenting, we're not just saying I'm sorry, we're changing our minds, we are transforming, we're asking God to transform our minds, we're asking our communities to challenge us to change our minds. And so in that, like, I'd say this to you all and to our listeners, this process will never end. Like, whether it's Black people, whatever group it is, whatever the Black, in America, Black means the lowest. Like, for a long time, that phrase was used for other white people to describe a low white person. That person has a Black soul, he has a Black condition. So when we say that, like, that's like looking for the lowest of the low. And it's a holy, sacred privilege, and whatever, that to go through that process. But you'll get frustrated and you'll stumble, and you just know that this is not just, you're not just apologizing, you're not just saying I have privilege, you're not just saying Black Lives Matter. And because that's on the other extreme, like people that are kind of, maybe at a level closer to what we're talking about, that get a lot of this stuff already, that there's a complacency there, that like, okay, I know all of this, like I'm there, like I'm not a racist, maybe they're out on the streets right now, like whatever, they're putting their lives on the line. And it's this idea that, like, no, like I could always love my brother and sister more deeply. There's never an award. Like, it's not a race. It's this constant purification process. And this is one of the most beautiful parts of Orthodox theology to me, that we get to be on this lifelong journey. It's not this, we flip on a switch and the adventure is over, we've won. It's just, no, like, how can I view this more deeply? How can I get even closer to viewing this through God's eyes?
Yeah. So Brad talked about God. I want to talk about the 3 things: the church, diversity, and next steps. That we have to first, as a group of people, understand that the church has never been a nationalist church. The church has never been an exclusive church. Even in the early days of the church, it was called the Church of Alexandria, not the Alexandrian Church. And they did that actually on purpose, the Church of Jerusalem, Church of Alexandria, because it served a geographical location with everyone underneath it. Because in Alexandria at the time, Greeks, Blacks, everyone was living together. So the Church of Alexandria served everybody. Even the Eastern Orthodox churches had a council in 1800s, and they made something called Philetism, a heresy, which basically, to say that any church is a nationalist church is a heresy against God, because we don't believe in like owning up or superiority of any nationality over the other. That's number 1. Number 2, diversity. We have to truly, like Chris said earlier, embrace our diversity, understand how God created it and how beautiful it is, that people across cultures laugh the same, they cry the same. Just because a Black woman in Chicago is used to having her kids being shot dead does not make her pain of losing a child any less than a white woman living in the suburbs who just loses a child in a car accident. Pain is pain, and pain is real across the board. And diversity is beautiful. Even like if you guys, it's so amazing, and I want to tell you this because it's kind of trippy. When I was traveling in Asia, if you were to travel from like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, and you kind of just move literally across the continent, you will see how diversity in culture kind of just transitions one by one by one. It's so amazing how everything just kind of molds together to the point that in Nepal, something so trippy happens. Nepal is made up of like, there's a lot of ethnically people who are like Bengali or like Indian looking, and people who are like mostly like with like Far East Asian features, like Chinese. And it's so crazy because you can see a patient who looks, sorry, not a patient, I'm not in the office. You can see a person who is from Nepal who has Asian features, who, like, and I apologize to all my Indian friends, you all know I love you, like who does like the Indian head bobble. And it's kind of so trippy. Like, what do you mean? Like an Asian person does this?
Or
But
some
that's how
racism
culture,
episode, you got to do some racist
yeah,
thing like that.
but
Come on,
that's
Mina.
but that's how cultures morph, man. It's so amazing how diversity, as God created it, is so beautiful. The last thing I'll say is that don't be afraid to have difficult conversations with your church leaders and your priests and your clergy. Go be able to, walk up to your priests and ask, how are we inviting, or how are we forming our own leaders in church? How are we changing our Sunday school curriculums? How do we invite our members to reflect and understand racism, understand privilege and the dignity of all people? What are we going to do from this point to discuss this actively in the church? That's it.
Not all at once,
Done.
guys. Not all at once. Not
I
all at
was
once.
gonna say,
Go ahead.
I was giving Sam the.
Sam, go ahead.
Um, I this is a really great conversation, Brad. Thank you. I learned a lot here, and obviously from all you guys as well, as I always do. And I think it's literally like the 0.01 step of this whole thing. There's so much to do. Like, it's not okay, let's make a podcast about racism and then like, okay, we attacked the whole George Floyd issue. No, this is like the most, yeah, it's not a checkbox.
Mark, yeah, we're good.
Like this, it's really the beginning. And I feel that, like, what you're saying, going to churches, asking your leaders, seeing what we can do. It's such a difficult time. It's hard to like, there's just so much going on, obviously, with the whole coronavirus and this and the economy. Like, there's so much. And kind of to what Brad was saying earlier, that we had to understand that these people are not, choosing to be racist. It was kind of ingrained in in the system, how they grew up or whatever. So I think, one, acknowledging on that side that this person is not necessarily like ill intent to be racist, and to understand that there is just like everybody has a backstory, everybody has preconceived notions, cultures, and things like that. The same thing, but to kind of meet people where they are and to know that, okay, there's some history, there's something behind it that I need to understand, instead of just, and I'm talking about I don't want to just mark somebody off as, oh, you're racist because you're saying this thing. No, maybe something happened. Maybe they grew up in the church that Brad, brought up, and they know nothing else, and it's not their fault. It's just to kind of see where they're coming from, as well as encouraging people to see where the people that are receiving the racist remarks and the prejudice, where they're coming from too. So I think, at least for me, it's really starting to encourage me to, like you're saying, have these difficult conversations, and not just to talk, but to move and to act accordingly. So I hope I can learn from you guys, see what we can do, and obviously after this podcast, just offline in general, see what we can do to really, like I said in the beginning, I don't want this to like go away in a couple of weeks and we forget, but really, like, help me or let me know if there's anything that I can physically do, tangibly do, write, read, run, talk to somebody, whatever, to really end this.
Yeah, and I really agree there, Samuel, that this is like the beginning. This is really the beginning for us. And it's, for me, the beginning has been, or is like this process of like learning to really understand what's going on. And like you guys said, in terms of being willing, and one of the listeners, to give them a shout out that people are saying in the comments, someone said vote, right? Like we have to encourage people to vote, to do the right thing in terms of voting, and having these uncomfortable conversations. It reminds me of a quote that I really love from the church fathers that says how God came to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted, right? So our role here, when people who are afflicted, we want to comfort them, but people who are just a little too comfortable in this idea of racism, it's okay for us to make them a little uncomfortable. And that's perfectly okay, whether within the church or within our friend group or wherever. And then the other thing, in terms of Amina saying we should also be praying wholeheartedly with sincerity, I think that's really important. That we can take like a stand on that. Like we have vigils and prayer meetings for oppressed things throughout the world. But there was one main concept that I learned this morning that I wanted to share in terms of like an active to do. It's a lot of work, but I think it's worth looking into. Because we're saying this stuff is so embedded and woven into so many parts of our society, one active thing that we can do is begin with the assumption that there is something that is sort of impacted by racism in my workplace, right? So maybe for me, I work in a clinic and I can ask, how come I only have one black guy on my patient load in this clinic, or whatever, like that. So the idea of looking into your workplace, maybe it's, we were talking specifically about healthcare and the tremendous health inequities that are just so in your face, right? But if each of us, like if Sam was to look into his school and Chris was to look into his PT world and see, is there equal opportunity for access? Is there equal opportunity here for the patients that Minas Wiris is seeing? So for me, in terms of my change, besides the generic things, in terms of voting and praying and learning, maybe it could also be doing like a little quality improvement project in my own circle, in my own world, whether it's wherever that looks like, to evaluate it and to suggest and to have a conversation about things changing in my own context, in my own little world. That was just something that was powerful for me to think about.
Yeah, and I think everything that all of you have said has been super powerful and impactful on me. And I have a lot to repent of. I have a lot of stuff that I need to work on and work through and change about my own heart and how I view my brothers and sisters in the world. Not just black people, but tons of other people that I have unconscious biases towards. So there are things within me that I have to work on and that I have to seek God in order for him to work within me, to open up my eyes to the things that I need to change. I need to listen, to hear the voices of those who are speaking out, because sometimes my voice is just so loud that I can't listen to others around me. And I'm also super encouraged that our church leaders are speaking out and people are saying things, clergy are saying things, and they're standing up and saying this is wrong. So I would encourage all of our listeners and everybody who's been tuning in for the last hour, sorry for the length of this podcast, but it's been a really powerful conversation. If you're tuning in late to the game, I'd encourage you to re-listen to this, because I think Brad made some really powerful, points about things that we need to be aware of. And my other brothers in this podcast have shared about different things that we can be doing as a church and as people to bring healing to the world around us. But it always starts with me. It always starts with what God needs to do in me and in my heart. So I have a lot of repenting to do. I have a lot of things that I need to change, and I would encourage all of our listeners to also be looking within to find, the heart issue of this matter.
Where can they find us, Chris, just as we close? If they didn't catch the last episodes, where can you find these podcasts?
These podcasts are everywhere you can find a podcast. So check in on iTunes, on Spotify, you have the videos on YouTube. You can find them everywhere. You can even ask Alexa to play the Reintroduction podcast. She's just about to play right now. She's you can find them anywhere. But we encourage you guys to tune in to check out past episodes about different misconceptions that we often have about God. and let's reframe how we view him in order for him to speak truth about who he is to us. So check them out. We encourage you guys. And thank you, brothers, for teaching me how to be a better human being. Kudos to you guys.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Brad, for joining
man.
us today.
Always
It
learning
was
from you guys.
great having
Appreciate
you
it.
guys.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Blessings, guys.
Blessings
Yeah.
all day.